Hi, it's Robin. From watching my videos, you might think I'm only into programming Commodore computers, but actually my love of programming came from my obsession with video games. Ever since the late 1970s, when I first saw arcade games like Space Invaders and Fire Truck down at the local grocery store. Then along came new arcade favorites like Asteroids, Galaxian, Pac-Man. I was completely obsessed with Pac-Man for a while. Frogger, Defender, Tempest. And then Nintendo arrived in my world with Donkey Kong. As much as I loved the shooters and the maze games, the platform genre became my new favorite. So ever since then, I've been a big Nintendo fan, and I've been following Jumpman's adventures, later renamed Mario, from way back then at Donkey Kong in 1981 right to the present. I've got basically every Nintendo console there is, and some of my favorite gaming experiences have been with those characters that first appeared, Donkey Kong and Mario. So when I ran out of quarters in the arcade, in the early 1980s, there was no Nintendo console, but you could play Nintendo games at home. Bizarrely, that was thanks to companies Atari and Coleco. Atarisoft had the rights to produce computer versions of Nintendo's games, and that's how we got the original Donkey Kong on the Commodore 64. And Coleco, maker of Cabbage Patch Kids and the ColecoVision game console, had the rights to make the home video game console versions. So that's why we have these strange artifacts like Donkey Kong by Nintendo, video game cartridge for use with the Atari Video Computer System and Sears Video Arcade, and down here, the package, program, and audio visuals, copyright 1982 by Coleco Industries. Nowadays, we're so used to seeing Nintendo jealously guard its IP and only put it on its own hardware, more or less. But back in the early 80s, you have Nintendo on Atari and Sears by Coleco. And there's Donkey Kong Jr. Here's the Intellivision version of Donkey Kong. And of course, the best home video game version of Donkey Kong was on Coleco's own ColecoVision. Donkey Kong was actually a pack-in, which seems really bizarre that when you buy a ColecoVision, the one game it includes is Nintendo's Donkey Kong. But in the early 80s, I didn't have any video game console, so I had to go with my friends to play their Atari 2600 or Intellivision or ColecoVision to play some Nintendo games. So in those early days when I got my C64, I wanted to play Nintendo on my Commodore. And in the early 80s, I could play Atarisoft, Donkey Kong, and even Mario Brothers, not Super Mario, but the original Mario Brothers, where Mario and Luigi look identical and are working down in some sewers for some reason. But Donkey Kong Jr., which I actually liked better than Donkey Kong, at least some years I liked it better. I couldn't actually play Donkey Kong Jr. at home on my Commodore 64, while my friends with Ataris, Intellivisions, ColecoVisions, they could play it. So that's why it was so exciting when my friend told me that he had a copy of Donkey Kong Jr. on disc. So I got a copy and brought it home and took a look at the directory. There it was, Donkey Kong Jr. listed on my Commodore 64. So of course I loaded it up. Unfortunately, I can't find my original disc with this on it anymore, so I'm loading it off SD card. It loaded up, it's running. Donkey Kong Jr. by 1404 and Nintendo. 1404. Well, I don't know about that, but who cares? Look, it's Nintendo Donkey Kong Jr. on my Commodore 64 in 1984 or whatever. Okay, so here we can choose 2-player if we want. Level 1, that's good. Okay, F7 to start the game. Here we go. Whoa, that's pretty good graphics. Kind of weird music. Oh! Enter password to start. Okay. I have no idea. Okay, password. Oh, did I get it? Here you go. Oh! Wait. I can't control him and enter password to start. Okay, I guess I didn't get it right. What would be a good password? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh! Did I get it? Nope. Enter password to start. A, B, C. No. So, you might not find it hard to believe that I spent hours as a whatever, an 11-year-old or whatever, trying to type in the password so I could play Donkey Kong Jr. on this. And I never succeeded. I eventually, as stubborn as I can be, as persistent as I can be, I eventually did give up. So here we are, far in the future. I'm wondering if we can figure out the mystery. Can we solve this password? Can I finally play Donkey Kong Jr.? So what we're going to be doing is try to use my Super Snapshot cartridge to look at the machine language and see if we can figure out how this works and what the password is. So the first thing we'll look at is here on the title screen, these function keys. Whatever one I press, it seems to just start going into that demo mode in the game. And if I press one again, it goes back to the title screen. So let's freeze the game here. I'll press the snapshot button, press M to go into the monitor, and the program counter is at 808C. So I'll just start disassembling a little bit lower than that in memory, 807. And if we're lucky, 808C. Okay, so this is where the program counter is currently. When we froze the computer, it was executing this little loop here. Load A with 0 page location C6 and branch if equal back to 808E. So basically, if this is an endless loop waiting for C6 to not be 0. Well, C6 is the number of characters currently in the keyboard buffer. The kernel interrupt scans the keyboard 60 times a second, and if a key is pressed, it's put in a buffer, and this location is incremented by 1 to indicate that there's another character available in the keyboard buffer. So while it's 0, no key has been pressed. As soon as a key is pressed, the computer will continue on and execute this JSR 80E5. So we can look at that. So just remember, this is the title screen. It's asking us to press one of these function keys. And as soon as we've pressed a key, it's going to jump to this subroutine at 80E5. And what does it do? Oh, it immediately puts a 0 in the border and background color screens, changes some bits in the VIC register, changes memory map configuration, and exits. If you remember from the title screen is blue, and then that password screen has a black border and background right here. So this is a clue that those keys are never actually read on the title screen. It's immediately going to that check password screen. Okay, so I don't think we have to exhaustively prove that. But basically, if we press any key, you'll see that the border and background change black right away. What we're really interested in doing is figuring out what the password is. So now that it's asking us to type in the password, let's freeze it again. And again into the monitor. And now we see that the program counter is at 9484, right here, PC program counter. Okay, so once again, we'll disassemble a little bit lower than that in memory, 9470. And here's some code, 9484. Okay, so this is where the code is executing right now. Ah, that loads again, C6, and branches back in a loop until the keyboard buffer has a character in it. And then what does it do? Well, it loads 0 and stores that back in the keyboard buffer, essentially, if not erasing the keyboard buffer, at least resetting it back to 0. And then it goes into an endless loop again. And here, once again, once you've typed a character, it puts 0 back in the keyboard buffer and does one more endless loop. So 947E. So just to remove the clutter here, I'll just show that listing again. This is where we're at. 3 endless loops. 1, 2, 3. And each time it doesn't appear to do anything with our keyboard input. So we're typing in the password, and as best I can tell, the program is just throwing away the input. It's not storing it anywhere. For sure, it's throwing out the first 2 characters. And then even after it's gotten the third, it's a bunch of nops. It really does not appear to be doing anything. And just in case you didn't notice, it does seem to always wait for 3 characters. 1, 2, 3. And then Donkey Kong Jr. climbs up the rope and back down again. A, B, C. So always waits for 3 characters. Okay, so it really seems to me that there is no actual password check. Okay, but maybe there is still a game here. Maybe there's some other way to activate it besides just typing in the correct password. So if this is just truly the demo mode and there's a real game here, we should be able to see that in action. Just 1, 2, 3. If I freeze it while Donkey Kong Jr. is climbing, there he goes. And if we go into the monitors here, let's look at the sprite monitor. Okay, and that might look kind of familiar if I enable multicolor mode. There is Donkey Kong Jr.'s head, and he's facing left. There's his legs facing left. There's his legs facing right. And there's his head facing right. And if we go forward a little bit more, there's Mario's left side. And there's his right side with his really big nose. But the fact that we're not seeing more sprites here, I'm going to go back and forward. And if we look through this whole bank all the way up to 4,000 hex, I think we'll see that there are no other sprites. If this was a full Donkey Kong Jr. game, I'm pretty certain we should see more sprites than just 2 poses for Donkey Kong Jr. and 1 static one for Mario. Well, Mario doesn't really do that much in this game, does he? But for sure, there should be sprites of Donkey Kong Jr. jumping. There's Donkey Kong's head. So if we go into hex mode here, and we type in that address of E40, and then we divide that by 40 hex, that's 64 decimal. Each sprite definition is 40 hex. Okay, so this sprite pointer is 39. And then this would be 3A, 3B, 3C, and then 1 garbage sprite, and 3E and 3F for Mario. So we might find those numbers helpful when we're examining the code shortly. So if we go back into the machine language monitor, if we look at 7F8, that is the default sprite pointers. And how about that? Those numbers we were just talking about, 3A and 39 for Donkey Kong Jr., and 3E and 3F for Mario. Sprite 0 and 1 are Donkey Kong Jr., and sprites 2 and 3 are Mario, and these other ones just appear to be garbage. What I didn't point out, when we look at the game, you notice that there's those creatures on the platforms there. If you're familiar with Donkey Kong Jr., there are those kind of bear traps that move around. Here they don't even look, they look more like weird red goldfish or something. But you'll notice that they're not even animated, are they? They're just static there. So this isn't even using those sprites. Those are probably just part of a bitmap. So even the fact that there aren't sprites is probably enough to prove that there is no Donkey Kong Jr. game here. This is just a hoax. But I think we can show it even more. Okay, so we'll just freeze it there. So if we look around here, 811B, we'll actually find the initialization code that sets up Mario's sprite pointers of 3E and 3F. and puts them there in 07FA and 07FB, sprite pointers for sprites 2 and 3. And this is saying the X position for Donkey Kong Jr.'s sprites, 0 and 1, interestingly offset by 2 pixels. It appears that Donkey Kong Jr. is actually overlaid sprites. You saw how his head was in one sprite and his feet were in the other. They're kind of overlapping in the middle. Basically, Donkey Kong Jr. is about 31 pixels high instead of the normal 21 pixels. And that's because he's 2 sprites with a more detailed head at the top and then his body and feet in another sprite at the bottom. So these are just saying various sprite pointers, sprite positions. And here's some more. But if we just start scrolling, I think you might notice a pattern. See all those decrement Ys here? That just means decrement the Y register by 1. Whole bunch of those in a row. And then Y is then stored in a sprite register. So if we just keep scrolling, you'll see there's definitely a pattern here. A bunch of decrements, then a couple stores and jump to subroutines, a bunch of no operations, NOPs, then a whole bunch of load and store code. And then here's the pattern repeats. Decrement Y, store Y, no operation, over and over and over again. And I think this is kind of the final proof that there's no game here. And also, that whoever programmed this this isn't very good programming style. You see, it's just the same pattern over and over again for hundreds and hundreds of bytes. Maybe even thousands of bytes worth of repeating very repetitious code. So we'll just look at one of these examples, 81AC. BA is being put in 9500, and then the sprite pointers 3B and 3C, those are the sprite pointers for Donkey Kong Jr. looking to the right, are set. Then Mario's X position is set to 58 and 70, and then that location that was stored in 9500, the BA, is pulled back into the Y register, which is then stored in the sprite Y register, and then we decrement Y 10 times, subtracting 10, and then that's stored in Donkey Kong Jr.'s other sprite. So if you get what's happening here, way up at the top, a Y position for Donkey Kong Jr. is set, BA, that's put in one of his 2 sprites, and then 10 is subtracted from it, 10 decimal that is, so I guess that'd be like B0 hex, is stored. And then the subroutine at 8A00 is called, and 8D100. So if we just look at those routines, just quickly for a bit of understanding, all it does is checks for a key press, and if there is not a key press, it just returns. And if there is a key press, this code runs, I believe that resets back to the title screen. So that's just checking periodically for a key press so that you can exit that demo mode and go back to the title screen as we saw. And to look at AD00, it just calls 8C00 many, many times and then returns. I think 17 times or something. So what is 8C00? Well, it's this really bizarre code which loads from D152. That is part of I/O. If you don't recognize it, it's a really weird thing. Really, that is location D012. The video chip, the VIC2 and the C64, only takes up 40 hex bytes. It's not fully decoded, so every 64, like 40 hex bytes or every 64 decimal bytes, a mirror image of the VIC occurs. It's not multiple VICs. It's just you can write to any of those registers or read from them, and it'll give the same values because they're all mirrored. And that's because it's not fully decoded, meaning that the processor sees that same video chip in many different locations. So I don't know why, but the raster register is loaded. It's stored in a memory location. Then it's loaded right back into the X register, compared with 0, and if it's not equal to 0, then it branches back again. This is a horribly inefficient way of doing it, but that's how they do it. And then D112 is read. Well, that is another mirror image of D012. And it's stored in CFFE, I guess just temporarily. It compares that with 0. And if it's not equal, branches back up here again. And then another mirror image is read. So all this code is it's some of the weirdest code I've ever seen. I don't know if it was done this way, to obfuscate it. I don't know if it was done to like show off that the programmer knew that there are these mirror images. Maybe the programmer just didn't understand. I don't know. Was it done deliberately inefficiently? Like to load the value, store it, load it into a different register. You could have just loaded it straight into X. You don't even need to compare with 0. That's unnecessary. There's so much inefficiency here. And I don't know if it's on purpose or not, but basically this seems to just wait. It kind of like delays. I don't know. It's really weird. Really weird code. So I guess we can just think of 8C00 as a delay routine. 81AC. So just to look again at that code we were looking at, we're basically at the top of the routine. We're told where Donkey Kong Jr. is going to be, his Y position, and that's all calculated. His position is updated. Read the keyboard. We delay for that strange raster interrupt reading code. Then we do a bunch of NOPs, and then the pattern repeats. And now instead of BA, B6 is put in Donkey Kong Jr.'s position. Yeah, what were Mario's positions last time? Here it's 5D and 7-5. Okay, and here it was 5-8 and 7-0. So Mario has shifted, was that 5 pixels to the right? And then all the rest of this code, 3-9 and 3A. And how about the sprite pointers? Right, Donkey Kong Jr.'s sprite pointers were 3C and 3B. So now they're 3, 9, and 3A, where Donkey Kong Jr. is looking to the left. So if you gain the idea here, compared to the last repetition, Donkey Kong Jr. has moved down. Instead of facing right, he's facing left. And Mario has moved from the left to the right, the way he jumps back and forth. And then all the rest of this code is the same. The same terrible subtracting 10. I don't know why they didn't just use the subtract opcode. I mean, if you load this into the accumulator, and the fact that they're using the Y register, like up at the top here, it's just bizarre. Like, this is so not how you should be doing this. I can't imagine a more convoluted way of this is his Y value in the accumulator. It's stored in a memory location, then loaded back into the Y register, then decremented. Maybe the programmer thought that you could only use the Y CPU register to affect the Y position of the sprites of Donkey Kong Jr. I don't know. And here's the pattern. Okay, again, Donkey Kong Jr. is another 4 pixels lower. And now he's facing to the right again. And now Mario has shifted again. And we see the pattern over and over again. Okay, I guess basically this is written out kind of like a very linear script. And this should totally have just been one piece of code. Like even this code could be more efficient. And then instead of copying and pasting it, or however it was done, like I guess with transfers, over and over again. You see this? This is each one of these. This is just incredible. I don't really know what to say. But this should all be data-driven. Donkey Kong Jr.'s positions, if nothing else, could just be in a list. And you read one value and send it to the subroutine. Now, his movement is actually so simple that could even be done like algorithmically. But, just a table would be fine. So these values should just be read. So it just goes over and over again. Okay, are you convinced yet? A800. A900. I think we're finally reaching the end. Okay, and finally. Okay, so I don't want to belabor this. I mean, maybe I've already gone way past. Okay, and one other interesting thing I think we can note here. See, this is all just filled with garbage here. AAs and 55s. That's all like just uninitialized RAM, 01s. So you see how there's a subroutine here. Right at 8B00, that's what we call page aligned. Every 100 hex bytes, or every 256 decimal bytes, there's a bit of code at 8B00. It's just saying the border color and resetting VIC register. Okay, so again, memory is just filled with garbage. Just that repeating byte. And watch, when we get to 8C00, there's a bit of code again, finally. Loading oh yeah, we looked at that. 8C00. And now that routine's over, and now memory between is garbage. So what I'm getting at here is that this is page-aligned code. Each major subroutine gets its own page of memory, even though it doesn't need it. 8D100, that's what we're looking at, that delay. 17 times it calls 8C00, and again, filled. So this is pretty much proof that this whole thing was written not in a proper symbolic assembler, but in a monitor, a machine language monitor, because this is a common way of programming when you don't have the convenience of assembler where you can insert and add lines. When you're just using a machine language monitor, you can use machine language mnemonics. You don't have to use hex bytes, but you're assembling it directly into memory, and that's where it will set. And for you to rearrange things is a lot of work using transfer commands. When you have a real symbolic assembler, if you've inserted new instructions, everything will just fall into place in memory. Why am I having trouble explaining this? But it's easy to insert or delete code and reassemble, and everything just falls into place again. But when you're programming with a machine language monitor, you're putting it directly into memory, and that's where it's going to stay. So my point is that all this page-aligned coding indicates that the programmer would just put a subroutine on each new page. So that might partly excuse how terrible some of this code is, to know that they didn't actually have a proper assembler, and they did this all just with some machine language monitor, maybe even like Supermon or Epic's fast load monitor. So all that to say is that this Donkey Kong Jr. that I got way back in 1984, I now know was just a hoax. It was like a troll. Maybe this was the very first fake game ever. I don't know. That purported to be a real game and then fooled you and wasted many hours of my life. And actually now it's continuing to waste their lives, isn't it? I've just spent the whole evening trying to figure this out. But I hope you learned something. I have a bit of closure now, knowing that there really was no game here, as much as I wish there was. Here's another disc. I'm going to load it up. And so The happy ending here is that in 2014, Andreas Yarga, best known as Mr. Sid, did his own port of Donkey Kong Jr. from the Atari 7800 version, I believe, to the Commodore 64. And fantastic art by STE. And this is by the same programmer who did the amazing Impossible ports of Prince of Persia and most recently Sonic the Hedgehog to the Commodore 64. Same guy, amazingly talented. So thank you very much to Mr. Sid and his team for finally bringing Donkey Kong Jr. to the Commodore 64 and doing it so excellently, and at least making one of my dreams finally come true about 30 years later. Thanks to my patrons for their support. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.
I'm seeing those games everywhere, at the laundromat, at the grocery store, at Grandma's restaurant, but none at home. This place without a computer.